Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar series. If you have any questions during the presentation today, please type them into the questions section of the GoTo webinar menu, and we will answer them at the end of each presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be uploaded to the Manitoba Agriculture YouTube channel shortly after broadcast. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. I'd like to welcome everybody to Crop Talk for August the 7th. And this week we actually are lucky enough to have Tammy Jones on again. And I think this week the big topic is a little bit about a resistant weed that has showed up in Manitoba that is fairly important. And I thought it would be good if Tammy would come on and kind of do her spiel as to identifying the weed, what to look for, and why it is such an issue. And then after that, we'll go through a bit of a crop update as to what we've been seeing in the field over the last week and go from there. But with that, I'd like to hand the screen over to Tammy and talk about tall water hemp.
Thanks, Lionel. All right, so tall water hemp is a tier 1 noxious weed. I promise you the good, the bad, and the ugly, but really I think there's only the bad and the ugly. But if you get bored of listening to me 2 weeks in a row, then you can put the theme song to the good, the bad, and the ugly on in the background, and that should entertain you for the next, I don't know, half hour or something like that. All right, let's see. I advance to the next slide. There is tall water hemp when it's mature. You can see that it does redden up a little bit. This is from a field in North Dakota from a couple of years ago. Ingrid Christensen had provided me with this particular picture. So this is what it will look like a little bit later on in a soybean field, and that is something that we should be looking for. So this is also a soybean field. If you look closely, you will find some trifoliates of soybeans in there, but this is one of the fields that I encountered this summer and is the main reason for trying to make sure that everyone's aware of the fact that it's around, that leaving it for any length of time, even if you have 1 or 2 in the field, it will take over quite rapidly. So in this particular case, the gentleman said that, 2 years ago he saw a couple in the field and it didn't really seem like a big deal. He wasn't sure what it was, but wasn't too worried about it. And then last year it was a fairly significant patch, and by this year, because it is a tier 1 noxious weed and does require destruction, he has had to mow about 20-30 acres of it out just to try and get things under control, and then hand rogue the rest of the field. So it does spread rapidly. This is the distribution map of where we have had confirmation of presence in 2019. So the RM of Rhineland, the RM of Reynolds, the RM of Whitemouth, and then also in St. Anne. And those are, the St. Anne location is really from a previous year and just continuing to monitor that particular location rather than being a confirmation from this year. But the other 3 RMs are from this year, and I would suspect that it's out of date already. I'm sure that there are other locations where it is, but that we haven't had it reported yet. So we developed a fact sheet that was released on August 1st. This is a picture of that, page 1 of that fact sheet. It is a 2-pager. We'll go through some of the details here in the PowerPoint presentation. And then we've also developed a YouTube video, which I'm going to try and show you now, and hopefully that manages to come through loud and clear. So here's that video.
Hi, I'm Tammy Jones, weed specialist with Manitoba Agriculture, and today I just want to take a quick look at red root pigweed and tall water hemp for identification reasons. So red root pigweed, very common in Manitoba. It has a wide leaf. There is a pubescence to the stem, so it has hairs on the stem. And if you look at it from the top down, you can see that there's a significant difference in how that leaf arrangement happens. Tall water hemp, a much more oval leaf. It's glossy, looks more waxy, and then a very smooth stem. When we get a little bit older, Red root pigweed has a compressed head, lots of seeds in there, but it's short and thick. We have another one in Manitoba called green pigweed, has a slightly longer head, as you can see here, and a little bit spiky looking. And really, once you start to get into water hemp, you'll start to see that it is quite long, quite different. And again, those glossy leaves and a lighter green color. The reason it's important to identify tall water hemp, it is a Tier 1 noxious weed in Manitoba. That does mean that legally it is required that it's destroyed, and it's a very prolific seed producer, quite aggressive competitor with crops, so we are concerned about it in the province.
Okay, so that's the YouTube video, and let's see if I can get back to, there are the resources, the links for all of them, which Lori has promised me that she will include when she distributes out the link to the webinar, and then that way should be fairly easy to get to them. All right, so there are lots of different red root pigweed relatives, so all in the amaranth family. So red root pigweed and smooth pigweed we definitely have had in the province before. Powell amaranth has been seen as well. Water hemp up until now, one or two very, localized sightings, and then Palmer amaranth we hadn't really seen, but that's all of them in one slide. This is from the University of Minnesota, and certainly we do notice that in different growing conditions they do look a little bit different, but they are also quite similar for the most part. So red root pigweed, it does have the hair on the stems and the leaves. They're dull leaves and not shiny at all. The leaves and stems, because of the hairs, feel rough. They're much more oval type of ovate or egg shape compared to the water hemp, which is a more oval or almost lanceolate type of leaf shape. It is monoecious, so the male and female flowers are on the same plant. Those seed heads are fairly compacted. There is branching to it, but the seed heads are short and thicker than a pencil, according to the University of Minnesota, which is where this description came from. I guess it depends on the size of the pencil, but it is a thicker type of a seed head. If we look at tall water hemp, it does not have hairs, so that ends up looking like a shiny or waxy appearance on the leaves, and then the stems are smooth. Terry Busk says it's like electric wire, it's so smooth. The leaves are generally long, they can be quite narrow, but they can vary a lot, and they can be fairly wide as well. And one of the reasons why there's a lot of variability with water hemp and Palmer amaranth is because the male and female flowers are on separate plants, so there's a lot of outcrossing that happens, a lot of genetic diversity, but the pollen and seed heads are long and narrow. They're located not only at the top of that plant, but also in the tips of the branches. So we'll take a look at some pictures. Someone did suggest to me that the cotyledons were an easy way to identify water hemp. So these are two pictures of water hemp cotyledons that I've taken, and I just don't find that there's a consistent enough look to them to be able to use that. When they get a little bit bigger, as soon as you start looking closely, you can see that the red root pigweed has some fuzz to the undersides of the leaves and the stems versus the water hemp, which is sparsely hairy at best and most of the time completely smooth. So very, very different in that. And so this was a nice picture to be able to provide. These are the petioles and the base of the leaves. And again, you can see that water hemp, and this is Manitoba grown water hemp and red root pigweed. That water hemp is so glossy with a super smooth petiole, whereas the red root pigweed, you can see that there is fuzz or hairs on that petiole, and that the leaf itself is a much duller color than the water hemp. So when we talk about monoecious, we're talking about the red root and the green pigweeds, where the seed heads are fairly compact. You have the male and female flowers all on the same plant, so all of the plants look relatively similar. We did see a number of green pigweeds last year, and again this year in the province it is becoming more frequent, and it does have a longer seed head than the red root pigweed, as you can see in that bottom right hand corner. but it still is typically somewhat hairy. The water hemp and Palmer amaranth, on the other hand, dioecious, so you will see differences in the seed heads. Certainly the male seed head seems to be showing up sooner than the female seed head, and it is more showy, and so you will see differences in plants, and that isn't that there's two different species in there, it's that there is, you know, male and female plants that are separate. So can color be an indicator of pigweed species? We've always said no, that the pigweeds can all have red or purple coloring to the undersides of the leaves, stems, and or roots. And if you look at the two plants that are there, both of those are water hemp plants, one with a very red stem, one with a very green stem, both found in the same field on the same day at about the same maturity in about the same area. So really no reason for a difference in those particular colorings, just happens to be the way it is. The only color difference really is that water hemp has a bright glossy green compared to the other pigweeds. Because of that lack of hairs, it just tends to look shiny and maybe a little lighter yellow green as far as the coloring of the leaves. So redroot pigweed has been a problem for us. It's in, you know, the top 10 in the weed survey for Manitoba for a number of years. It is a C4, so it likes hot and dry, very prolific. The seed is viable for at least 5 years. It has a significant taproot, so it competes, especially when there's, you know, open areas, it competes really well for resources, and it can be 1 or 3 feet, up to 3 feet tall. I would say it can go even taller than that. Again, those leaves are typically a dull green, they're alternate. It likes to germinate at high temperatures, and it will germinate late in summer when there is adequate soil moisture. So no surprise with tall water hemp as a relative that it is also a C4. The change is that it's dioecious, very genetically diverse because of that. It produces on average 250,000 seeds per plant. That can be up to 1 million seeds per plant. So even if you only leave 1 or 2 plants in the field, if you have really good seed production, you may have 1 million problems next year instead of 1. So roguing that 1 plant now is very important. It will germinate throughout the summer, especially in reduced tillage systems. And if you look to the picture, you'll see that I have a red circle. So these plants were found in the same field. That first really large plant is from an early germination, but there are like 4-leaf cotyledon type seedlings that are emerging or have emerged very recently. So flushing as well, and typically that happens when there's open spaces again. So if you're on 30-inch beams or you have corn, then there's lots of opportunity for that tall water hemp or water hemp to take advantage of that. Can be up to 8 feet tall, typically 4 to 5 feet tall. And you might think that that is really easy to see in a crop then. Not really. Corn is much taller. And in soybeans, it tends to just grow to the height of the crop for now. Maybe as the seed heads grow up, it'll become more apparent. But really right now, we're not seeing really easy to find plants because we've rogued that patch several times, and that tall plant was still managing to stay in the row and not be noticed by us after several passes through there. So it's not super easy to find. And again, like I said, glossy leaves and more elongated, narrow than typical redroot. So it does have a growth rate that's 50 to 70% greater than most of our annual weeds. And what does that mean in real life? Well, in favorable growing conditions, we're looking like 1 inch or 1.25 inches a day. So genuinely, you know, comes out of stage really quick, and it is challenging to keep under wraps. There are multiple herbicide-resistant biotypes. So the ones that I'm familiar with are the groups 2, 4, 5, 9, 14, 15, and 27. At Crop Diagnostic School, Dr. Rob Golden from the University of Manitoba was indicating that they're working on confirming a 9-way resistant biotype. So we're not done with the 7-way. There's a 9-way under investigation currently. So identified at 4 locations in Manitoba this year. No herbicide resistance is confirmed yet because that requires seed collection and further testing, but we do suspect group 2s, so the imatazolinones, group 5 atrazine, and then group 9 glyphosate. And there is rapid plant establishment along field perimeters, standing water, and drainage ditches. This picture is of some hurt water hemp, not killed water hemp, along the side of a field in the ditch. So it's competing quite well in that ditch area, and it's quite thick. There were hundreds of plants in this patch, not just a few. And so those areas need to be controlled as well because they'll set seed and provide future headaches too. So how many amaranth seeds on the dime? There's approximately 70, and that dime isn't covered. And if you look at the small vial that's about the size of a AA battery, then we're looking at over 40,000. So it's easy to see that seed can hide in lots of different places. It could be with the seed source, but it can also be in equipment. It can be carried by wildlife, all sorts of reasons that it has an easy time moving when it's that small. So limiting movement, providing adequate sanitation is really a challenge when you have such a small seed. Just to remind everyone, herbicide tolerance is the ability to survive a herbicide, but not because it was previously a lethal herbicide. It's just naturally tolerant, the plant is, whereas resistance is the inherited ability of the plant to survive. And that's why there's a delay in typically reporting herbicide resistance, because you do need to collect the seed and test the progeny in order to ensure that's an inherited ability. So while we can suspect the herbicide resistance, we can't technically confirm it until after we've done significant testing. So how does that spread? In this particular case, selecting a couple of resistant individuals in a field, which then becomes a patch really, really quickly. It's not like kochia where it's going to tumble through like we have on this particular situation here, but geese, water, and definitely a combine. If you blow it through the combine and it's 1 million seeds, it goes from 1 point to 1 million points of contact. So that is genuinely something that we need to be aware of. Like I mentioned before, and just to show you, if you go to weedscience.org and keep an eye on something like Amaranthus tuberculatus, which is the scientific name for water hemp, then we do have 7-way resistance at this point in time, and like I said, working on 9-way resistance confirmation. Okay, so that brings me to the Noxious Weeds Act and why I'm so worried about water hemp, other than it's just a monster to try and control. It was declared a Tier 1 noxious weed based on all the revisions of the Noxious Weeds Act. So there used to be like 500 weeds on the act. When the new act was proclaimed in April of 2017, then there were about 20 that were on the Tier 1 listing. Tall water hemp is one of those ones, and that does have some specific requirements with it. So a noxious weed means a plant that is designated as a Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3 noxious weed. It includes the seed, whether it is still attached to the weed or if it's separate from it. So in this particular slide, I'm showing Palmer amaranth, which is the nasty relative of water hemp and the different growth stages of it. But here's the meat of the issue. With the Noxious Weed Act, the responsibility to destroy all Tier 1 noxious weeds that are on the land that the person owns or occupies, okay? So whether you rent it or own it, you need to destroy all of those noxious weeds, which is why there has been significant efforts in all of these detections to make sure that that is happening. So again, the responsibility with Tier 1s is to destroy them. If it's a Tier 2 or a Tier 3, we have other options for control depending on the size of the patch, but a Tier 1, regardless of the size of the patch, regardless of the level of infestation, they must be destroyed. It also means that we are prohibited from moving machinery after it has been present in an area where there's a noxious weed. So that means if you've put a quad through a patch, if you have sprayed that area, if you have used a combine in that field, whatever the case may be, the legal expectation is that it needs to be cleaned and all presence of that weed needs to be removed from the item before it is moved so that we prevent spread throughout an area. Okay, so that's pretty significant and something that we haven't really been as worried about because there wasn't that many tier 1 noxious weeds that we were aware of that we were going to have this cleaning requirement. Now that has some impact. Okay, so I went to the Ohio State University Extension fact sheets that they have, and now is about the time when we can start to look for water hemp and actually be able to see it fairly well. So on this picture, this is a male water hemp. It is fairly showy. It does have, you know, lots of pollen there, so you can see it fairly easy in contrast to the soybeans. That's lovely and helps you to find it. The reasons that they want us to, or they want their growers to scout are the same reasons that I want our growers to scout. This weed is not easy to manage. It can cause substantial increases in herbicide costs. So you're looking at $45 to $60 an acre to control this weed well in a crop production system. Programs have to be constantly changed due to multiple resistance that will develop over time. So that's their wording, not mine, but I agree with them. It's not a can, it is a will. And based on the studies that have been done, the trend is for Palmer amaranth and water hemp to develop resistance to new herbicide sites of action that are applied as post-emergent treatment, so that in-crop treatment, within about 3 cycles of use. So that means, say we don't have group 27 use. You have 3 times to use it before that population or that biotype is likely to develop resistance to it. So that's daunting. We need to use our tools very judiciously and know that we need to change very rapidly to this particular weed. So this is a female plant, definitely a smaller seed head at this point in time, and just not as showy. From the fact sheet, they suggested walking the fields. Not everyone is capable of doing that for a number of different reasons, but even if there's binoculars at the side of the road or flying over it with a drone to see if you can find a weird patch, definitely scout field borders and adjacent roadsides, areas that flood or receive manure applications. And then in the US, they're also talking about monitoring their Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program or their wildlife area seedings, because lots of states don't have water hemp and Palmer amaranth on the noxious weed list. So Ohio State does, but some of the others don't. And so when they're getting seed in from other areas, then they don't have the same regulations on these particular plants. And that's something that we need to be aware of too, is seed can potentially have one. It might be one in one bag out of 40, but that could be enough to get you into a situation. Okay, so this is a little bit harder to see the water hemp in here. So there is one here. I'm a very poor drawer with a mouse. There's another one down here. Oof. And they blend in quite well. They're quite close to the same green in this particular field, so that makes it a little more challenging to see. And then the recommendations are plants without mature seed should be cut off below the soil surface. And I'll say the reason that that needs to happen is because anything that gets cut off above the soil surface where there's still growing points that are available to grow, it will continue to grow. And I have lots of demonstration plants where I've cut it off, 2 inches above the soil surface, and it quite easily regrows from that stem that's left. The other thing is that those plants, if you pull them out, they do have a tendency to reroot, and then every node tends to send up another plant and a seed head to go with it. So it is a very challenging weed to control, and need to keep that in mind. Now, if there are any plants with mature seed, they need to be bagged or removed in a way that prevents seed dispersal, not only through the field, as they're mentioning here, but along the roadside, to any other fields that you're in, all that sort of thing. So very important with mature plants to destroy them. The problem is I'm not sure if burning or composting mature seeds is going to destroy 100% of them, and we really don't want those moved off the field that they're in to another area to potentially spread. So that's a challenge for controlling those or destroying those. Pardon my misuse of the term. Okay. Also, there is a lovely water hemp plant in here, and this is much more typical of what we're seeing. And you will notice that this is a different leaf shape for the soybean. So we're looking at that more linear type of leaf shape with this particular soybean variety. And then if you see the water hemp in here, then the leaves start to match a little bit more closely, and it is a little more challenging to see that water hemp plant in there. If you have an area of a field that is infested with water hemp, mow it before it sets seed, and mow it several times to continue preventing seed. Don't harvest that area. If you have a field that has been previously infested, especially corn where it's challenging to find water hemp, then harvest it last, and then clean the combine thoroughly, which is mandatory because of the legal requirements to clean that machinery before you move it. But really clean it thoroughly before further use so that you don't spread to other sites, other fields. So from Ohio State University, this is their campaign, No Pigweed Left Behind, Go Rogue, Stop the Seed. I 100% agree with that. And I'll leave it there, open it up to questions, because there probably are a couple.
Okay, I've got a couple for you, Tammy. The first one is when you showed the map, there was an area kind of on the eastern edge of the province, and then one on the southern edge of the eastern side of the province. So would that imply that the seed is coming up from the States and in from Ontario? Does Ontario have the problem as well?
Yes. So it doesn't imply anything. I can confirm that both North Dakota and Ontario have tall water hemp or have water hemp populations. North Dakota also has detected Palmer amaranth in the state, so it is creeping up as well. And weeds don't respect borders at all. So we do know that water hemp has moved up through waterways in the past. And in fact, there was a water hemp plant that had been detected, I think in Maleta at one point in time, just by a water issue as well. So that's why flooded areas are important to be monitoring. And I should mention that during August and September, I will be undertaking a monitoring and surveillance program to scope out areas and see if we're finding any more detections. So that will happen. But there is the possibility of it moving in a number of different ways. And I'm not going to point the finger at any one source, but whether it's wildlife movement, whether it's water movement, whether it's equipment or seed, there's just too many options. And based on some of the crop histories that we've seen, it genuinely looks like maybe wildlife is one of the main contributors to spread, at least here in Manitoba.
So waterways, so are we kind of comparing it to a bit to like leafy spurge where you see it in a lot of the waterways?
It can spread that way. In a couple of the fields, there is no water at all, no standing water this year. I mean, we've been through a dry spell. So maybe that's the reason that I can't see a clear correlation with water, but a couple of the fields are just in the middle of nowhere with no water close by, and so it's likely some other way that it's been spread, but certainly a couple of the fields are closer to water, and possibility is that that could be the reason, but really challenging a couple of years after the fact to try and figure out how it could have got into those fields.
There's a question that came online here. Is this, so you're talking about cleaning equipment. What type of cleaning would that be? Would that be like air hose, blowing them off, vacuuming, or disinfecting, or
so it depends on the
what
equipment.
type of cleaning do you mean?
Right, it definitely depends on the equipment. It's not going to be convenient to clean, but I would recommend knocking any dirt off, because we have found that it doesn't take very much soil to help bring along a few seeds. So any excess soil that's on that machinery, any plant parts, and yeah, I would genuinely, if it's a combine, want to blow it out to try and get any weed seeds out of it. And that is going to be a lot of work. If it's a sprayer, again, any excess soil whatsoever, sweep it down, try even hose it down if you've got a pressure washer that you can come along and quickly give it a once over, because it just is such a small seed and very easily transportable. And so scouting with a quad, especially in a muddy situation, that worries me greatly, that there's a potential to be spreading stuff as well. So I've got lots of worries, and so the most you can do to clean whatever, when you think you've done enough, go one step more, and then maybe I'll stop worrying.
Okay, I've got one more question for you. Most of the pictures you showed were in fields of soybeans. Was that just because that's where it is this year, or where you're finding it this year? Or
it's easier to show you in soybeans.
I guess when you get...
Right, so it is easier to see in soybeans, but typically you're going to find it most often in a corn or soybean crop for a number of reasons. One is row spacing, one is the herbicides that are used. Typically there's some resistance to some of those because the water hemp that's in the States was mainly problematic in the corn and soybean production areas. So then it's a challenge in some of those areas. If you go to a wheat crop with a narrow row spacing or oats or barley, cereals of any type, you canopy quicker, you shade faster, the water hemp doesn't have as much opportunity to compete, and then you do a better job of controlling it in that type of a scenario. So management plans going forward will be emphasizing diversity within the rotation, changes to your not only your crop plan, but your herbicide rotation, to make sure that you're looking at pre-emergence with residuals. And I didn't want to go into all of the management side of it because I could go on forever, but pre-emergent herbicides to help before canopy closure, ensuring that canopy closure is very rapid. Even in a corn field now that I was in, there's lots of little seedlings coming up now. So it doesn't block out enough sun with the corn, even when it's 6 feet tall, to prevent that germination at this time of the year. So that's a real challenge. And corn and soybeans are the ones that typically have that open area a little bit more so than some of the cereals or even canola.
Okay, and just one more question got in here. You mentioned mowing. So would it be similar to kochia? If you mow kochia, it still tends to go to seed. So is it very similar in that way, or if you keep it mowed, you'll stop it from going to seed?
You're not going to just be able to mow it once. It's just like kochia. It's going to keep growing and it's going to try and set seed, and it's going to reduce the amount of seed produced, but it's not effective in completely destroying the plant. And I genuinely want destruction. Now, in order to do that, if it's a heavy infestation 1 year, it may take a year or two for us to achieve that. And that's where, if I've got 1 million plants and there's no other way of doing it, because tillage does stimulate germination, so, and would bury some seeds to, possibly live longer. So I'm not really thinking tillage is the option, whereas mowing to minimize seed set and then rotating to a more competitive crop next year so that you can then get rid of those seedlings is the strategy that we're looking at right now. It won't be 100% effective. We will still need to do roguing. There will still need to be surveillance and monitoring for years after to make sure that we are keeping it under control and destroying any plants that do emerge. But it's a step to reduce seed set so that we're minimizing the problem rather than exponentially increasing the problem by allowing it to go to seed.
Okay, and just one more quick one I just got here is, are the weed districts being involved in scouting for these?
So I will be trying to get everyone to help with this. Anyone and everyone that has a suspicious weed, I would encourage you to contact myself, your local Manitoba Agriculture office, your weed inspector for your municipality, your weed supervisor if you're in a weed district. I'm sending letters to the municipalities that currently have detections to make sure that they are aware and that they are trained on identification. But I am also talking to municipalities that may not be as active in scouting to make sure that we try to make that happen. And because resources are limited, that's why I will also be doing some surveillance and monitoring for a fairly extensive part of August, September, to make sure that with the help of other Manitoba Ag staff that we are trying to keep this under control rather than becoming another Ohio or something like that. So we're taking it seriously and we're looking for cooperation wherever we can find it.
Okay, well, that's all the questions I have, Tammy, and thank you for coming on again. I think this is a pretty important topic, and I think we're going to be hearing a lot about it in the near future. So thanks for the update, and keep us informed with anything else that comes up over the next little while here.
I really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks, Lionel.
Okay, so what we'll do now is I've got a little bit of a quick update here as to what's been going on in the field. Just to look at our weather report over the past 8 days, rainfall amounts have been limited again. There's been some spotty thunder showers that have gone through that have dropped some rain, but even in those areas, the amount of rainfall has been very limited. Looking at our growing degree days, we're still not quite where our normal is. We're still a little bit below normal, and same with our corn heat units. And overall moisture is lower than average. And I think when you look at all of that, you could see probably the biggest effect we're seeing is the lack of rainfall and causing a lot of the crop to start to I guess I'll say ripen prematurely. There's between the heat and the lack of moisture, a lot of the crop over the past week to 10 days has definitely started to ripen in. We're definitely getting into harvest mode. The eastern side of the province more than the western side, but even on the western side here, we have producers swathing barley. Peas are being sprayed, and the odd field has actually come off already on peas. Fall rye is being harvested, And spring wheat, actually, there is the odd field that in the next week here is probably going to be sprayed. So harvest is definitely coming on a little bit quicker than we thought, especially after the different spring we had this year. Looking at our growing degree days for the provinces, and you look at right now we're sitting probably in that 14 to 1700 growing degree days based over the majority of the province. And when you compare that to last year at this time, we were a lot of Manitoba anyways, especially the southern portion was in the 1700 to 2000 range. So definitely our growing degree days are down. But I think with the lack of moisture, we're probably still on the same track for harvest time. As I mentioned, several fields of wheat over this past week have definitely ripened in, and I think it was Tammy last week when she talked a bit about pre-harvest, was talking about the peduncle on the cereal crops, and there it is right there. You can see it's definitely turning. When that happens, you're getting to the stage where you're looking at the head not getting much more nutrients, and therefore just starting to ripen off what's in the head. We've been doing a fair few surveys over the past week again, and fusarium is showing up in some of the fields, and probably as we do more of them, we're seeing a few more in all the fields, but so far levels are fairly low. I guess the biggest one we did notice in fields that weren't sprayed, or what I've noticed anyways, in fields that weren't sprayed for fusarium, we're seeing a little bit higher levels of fusarium, but still overall, I think the level of fusarium is going to be fairly low this year. And that probably goes back to the drier conditions. Had a call regarding purpling on canola. This is something that's very common when we get a lot of sun. You'll notice this one that close up of, you see the top half, this would be facing the sun. It's got a purplish type color, and you turn the pod over and it's green on the bottom side. So that's basically a sunburning of the canola. Doesn't really affect anything regarding seed development inside the pod, but just sometimes it tends to give the field a little bit more of an early mature type look to it, especially from the road. Get out there and take a look at it. It's really not ripening. It's just basically a purpling of the pod. Seen some alternate black spots showing up. This is, again, a disease we probably see every year in the canola. It's black spots that'll usually be on the pods, sometimes on the stems as well. Severe enough, it can cause the seed to not develop or to shrivel up inside the pod. Again, levels have never been overly high where we need to worry about them. So again, just something as you're scouting out in the fields over the next little while here, whether you're looking for weeds or you're looking for disease. I know there's a lot of producers that are even looking at some of the early fields of canola that might not be too far from being ready to swath. When you're out there, you can be scouting for a lot of different things that are going on. The other thing to be looking for is when you're going to be out there swathing is blackleg, and that's something that's fairly common over the last few years. With the weather we've had this year, it might not be as severe, just like I haven't seen sclerotinia as bad so far, but you can see where when you got the stalks, and if you cut the stalks in half, you can see the severity of the blackleg, as you know, these ones here where the stalk is fairly clean as compared to these ones here where the blackleg is affected. And basically what happens is as it takes over the stem, it stops the nutrients from going up the plant, and your plant actually will ripen prematurely and not fill the heads. A good guide to use for looking at how it's going to affect your crop. When you've got it affecting the entire stem, you're going to see some major yield losses. but then when you see just minor effects of it, a lot of times you probably won't see any yield loss at all. It'll be just something you'll notice in the field. And I like to, a lot of times with producers on their swathing is a really great time to look for blackleg and to show blackleg to producers, because the stalks are right there ready to see, and it's the symptoms definitely show up. A little bit about soybeans. Right now we're probably in the R3 to the early R5 stage, I guess, on some of the later seeded stuff. I guess the biggest thing with soybeans is some of the fields that have missed recent showers are starting to show symptoms of moisture stress, and maybe not as much in this picture, but a little bit in this one, as you can start seeing some of the leaves starting to change color. This one I took, it was in a lighter soil, and with the lighter soil, and there it was kind of a ridge. You could see where moisture affecting the overall maturity of the plant, and you're almost starting to see some leaf drop. So we're definitely going to be in the need for some moisture over the next little while here for soybeans. You can see the pods are developing and starting to fill the seed. And I mentioned the stage we're in the R5 stage. As you get into the R6 and R6.5 stage, that'll be where the seed is fully developed already. Then R7, when you start seeing some color change and pod change color. Put this up just to show you the importance of moisture over the next 2 to 3 weeks here. During the growing season, soybean water use will fluctuate throughout the growing season, and from the mid to late productive growth stages are the most sensitive to water stress. So basically the stages from the we're in the R3 stage to the R5, we're probably in some of the critical stages right now. And if we don't receive enough moisture during this time period, what you could see is some pods aborting the seed and not developing the seed. Or if it happens later on in the cycle, what you could see is some pods that the seed doesn't fully develop, and then we get some lighter weight pods or lighter weight seed, and just not a good sample. So when I go back to this one here, and this was a picture taken on that lighter soil, you can see the two seeds there that seem to be fairly far advanced in their development inside the pod, and then one that's slower or not quite as developed. This could be an issue of moisture stress and just not getting enough moisture to fill that pod or develop that last seed. Grasshoppers, I'm getting more and more reports of grasshoppers throughout the area. The majority of them are coming from producers on pasture or areas where producers have taken a first cut, and then there's some second cuts starting to grow, and they seem to be moving in there and doing a fair bit of damage. Again, a lot of it is edges of the field, but I haven't heard of anybody having to do any major spraying or in fact any spraying so far. Now, with the conditions the way they are, we could see this developing into an issue, but right now, with the way the crop is maturing, we might be just a little bit ahead of the game for them to do any significant damage on at least the cereal crops and our oil seeds. But when we get into some of our sunflowers and maybe they might get feeding on heads and stuff like that, so we might need to be watching there. I guess with that, those are just a few of the things I wanted to mention of some of the things that have been going on this past week. As I mentioned, we're getting into kind of that full swing harvest, so I think we'll be seeing more stuff in the field as we get back into the field and getting some of the crop swathed and harvested. But as always, if you're having issues, to go to our reports that are online. You'll get the growing conditions, the weather maps, John, Tammy, and Dave put up the insect, weed, and disease updates on a weekly basis, and they're really good. I'm sure there'll be information regarding Tammy's discussion today. Also, there's the other sources like Crop Chatter, our Twitter site, and just in general, the Manitoba Government Eggs website for general information. If you got questions, and Tammy had mentioned, if you're seeing an odd weed in your field that you're not 100% sure what it is, or you'd like somebody to investigate a little bit farther, give any one of these people a call. I'm sure they could give you a hand into identifying the weed and or sending the weed away to get it identified if it can't be done in the field. Just got a question in, and they wanted to give an update on what the pasture situation is. I think in general, a lot of the pastures right now are starting to really show the effects of the dry conditions. There are several producers that may have started grazing early or in situations where they're starting to have to feed on pasture. I know producers that are hauling water to pastures right now. I think any pasture that was overgrazed early in the spring or started to, cattle put out in early May, probably more than anything because of a lack of feed, because there was a little bit of a feed shortage last fall. I think a lot of those areas we're seeing those pastures drying down, and they're to the point now where they're not going to come back again this year, even if we were to receive some good rains over the next week or 10 days. For those producers, I think feeding is going to be an option, or if we can get some of this harvest done a little bit earlier, maybe we can move them to some of the fall grazing paddocks and get that done. I've been talking to a few of the producers that are in PFRA situations, or the former PFRA pastures, I guess, and they might be, or they're starting to be concerned that some of those pastures might have to send cattle home a little bit early as well. So I think in general, the pasture situation is really tight right now. And I think in a lot of cases, we might be seeing some early feeding until we can get a lot of the harvest off and get the cattle on some of the bigger areas. Regarding feed, I think there is a big demand for feed this year, and there will also be a big demand for straw. So if you have the ability to drop straw, or you're willing to drop straw, I'm sure there's beef producers in the area that would be willing to bail that up and work a deal with you. So keep that in mind as you're going out into the field to take the harvest off. Regarding the webinars, they're all on YouTube. So here are the links for the sites. And I guess with that, that's the webinar for today. And join us next week, August the 14th, as we're looking at a harvest update webinar.